Chapter 71. Swish! Eungom retrieved his sword. Drops of sweat ran down his forehead. A good sword art. There was definitely something different about the Seven Sages' sword that they had learned from Mount Hua and what he was following now. It cannot be called the best, but the sword was still amazing. It would take a heavy investment of time to truly understand and master this sword art. However, even with his shallow achievements, Eungom already understood that this Seven Sages' sword was a level higher than what they were currently taught. If this sword can be taught properly, Mount Hua will become stronger. The present disciples will become stronger, and the future generations will be even more powerful. Just thinking about it made Eungom smile. Eungom quickly rubbed his smile away. This is quite difficult. He was still a teacher, which meant he had to be strict with his disciples. Lately, though, he just couldn't stop smiling. Until now, the experiences that third-class disciples have shared could not simply be summed up as mere hardships. Ever since they entered Mount Hua until now, there has been nothing but struggle and suffering. Still, they devoted their youth to Mount Hua. With the collapsing sect on their shoulders, they constantly overcame the hardships and persevered through suffering. After such a long period of darkness, they were only now seeing the light. We aren't fully out of trouble yet. Although Eungom could finally see the light at the end of the long tunnel, he was all too aware that there was still a long way to go. Even so, he couldn't erase the smile on his face. It was all thanks to the third-class disciples who started to grow strangely quick in recent times. The elders and the sect leader seemed to find the greatest joy in the fact that Mount Hua was financially stable and had found its lost martial arts. But it was different for Eungom. As the head of the White Plum Blossom boarding house, the growth of his disciples was what brought him the most satisfaction. They're different from us. The second-class disciples tried their best, but unfortunately, Mount Hua didn't have an appropriate environment to train or improve. To be honest, they didn't have much passion for martial arts either, but the third-class disciples are more passionately devoted to their personal training than any of the Mount Hua's previous disciples. Eungom smiled, put the sword on his waist, and left the training hall with light steps. It was time to train the children. His imagination was overflowing with pleasant thoughts. Mount Hua's desperate situation had been resolved. With their recovered martial arts and the third-class disciples showing a vigorous desire to grow their martial talents, it seemed that the hour of Mount Hua's resurrection was growing near, and the main characters of that revival will be the third-class disciples. I'll have to work harder for that to happen. How could he call himself their mentor if he couldn't even lead his students who were working hard by themselves? Eungom turned and entered the disciples' training hall before shouting with a flustered face. Okay, let's do well today too. What is this? Fuck! Eungom stepped back in shock. What was in front of his eyes could only be described as pure chaos. Arm! My arm! Back! My back is down! Broken! Save me! Save me! Unknowingly, Eungom rubbed his eyes. What had happened in this training hall? Suddenly, Eungom felt that his dreams of teaching Mount Hua's future leaders had been set ablaze and were crashing down around him. All the third-class disciples were lying on the floor, groaning while holding their wooden swords, their shoulders trembling and mouths drooling. What the hell happened? At that moment, a sound erupted from somewhere nearby. Eungom turned his head and saw Jogul's figure using his wooden sword with his shirt off. Jogul. Sweat was pouring down his body like rain. Each time the sword was swung, sweat scattered, and a hot breath could be seen exhaling from his mouth. Blazing red eyes, full of focus, and trembling shoulders told the story of a boy pushing himself past his limits. Even Eungom felt his entire body tremble at the sight. Okay, one more! At those words, Eungom's eyes turned. What is with him? Next to Jogul, Chung Myung was slowly holding his sword. Unlike Jogul, who was sweating profusely, Chung Myung seemed rather refreshed. His hair was neat, and not even a single strand stood out of place. He wielded his sword smoothly in a relaxed fashion, unlike the Sahyungs scattered around on the verge of death. Just swinging your sword isn't enough. If you're going to swing once, imagine squeezing out all your strength, from the tip of your toes to your head and through your sword. Once more! What was the situation? Wasn't Chung Myung the youngest of the third-class disciples, so why is he teaching Jogul? However, everything Chung Myung said was correct. Okay, one more. In the end, Jogul, who couldn't stand it, fell to the floor. Seeing that, Chung Myung clicked his tongue. You people are seriously weak. Chung Myung sighed deeply. You're just overworking your body. You aren't a cow. Use that head of yours. Use your brain. Think about how to swing the sword so that you can utilize all the strength in your body and then swing it. What? Eungum's eyes trembled. The other elders might be unaware, but Eungum knew that Chung Myung could control the third-class disciples to some extent. It may be difficult to understand, but weren't there always talented people whose skills transcended their age? However, what Chung Myung was discussing now wasn't something that could be waved off as simple talent or ability. Does this mean that he has a higher understanding of the martial arts? The more he observed this kid, the more amazed he felt. Eungum, suddenly awoken from his thoughts, shook his head. This wasn't the time for such things. What is this? Chung Myung shook his head when Eungum asked. Oh my, teacher! Chung Myung quickly ran up to Eungum. How was last night? Seeing him act like a child, the third-class disciples gritted their teeth. That sly son of a bitch! If he was in the Imperial Palace, there would have been books written positively about him. He's a demon with no spine, constantly changing sides. Why wouldn't they be upset? Chung Myung was the youngest and should have shown respect to them as his Sahyungs, but he only showed respect to Eungum and the other elders. In particular, Jogul and Yunjung, who were the biggest victims, dejectedly looked at Chung Myung with narrowed eyes. What happened here? We were training. Training? This is training? No, it certainly was training. Eungum witnessed Jogul swinging the sword with his own 2 eyes, but the result was... Teacher! Too difficult. I might die. The third-class disciples looked at Eungum like puppies who found their master. Without realizing it, Eungum ended up raising his voice upon seeing their expression. Training is a part of the process to develop the body and mind. Don't you know that too much training is poisonous, and you... I know, teacher. Huh? Eungum's eyes narrowed as Chung Myung's words interrupted his lecture. Did this mean that he had a proper response to give in this situation? But this training wasn't started by me. The Sahyungs, who didn't want to experience disgrace in the Mount Hua and Jungnam Sect conference, have... Conference? Right. The conference was approaching soon. That was true. The Sahyungs were upset with the humiliation they faced last time. Upset? Eungum slowly turned his head and looked at the third-class disciples. The children were desperately waving their hands behind Chung Myung. Seeing their reaction, Eungum said, looking at the children, that doesn't seem to be the case. What? Is that possible? Sasuk, how could one be proud to declare themselves as a disciple of Mount Hua if they've suffered defeat at the hands of those Jungnam bastards? He was right. We can lose once, but losing twice is unforgivable. A disciple of the great Mount Hua should never accept such results. Right. Confusion beset Eungum as he began to nod his head. There were only 2 things he valued most in the world. One was the pride of Mount Hua, and the other was to raise the disciples correctly. Now, it seemed that both of his values had turned their blades towards one another and conflicted. Chung Myung, who read the confusion in Eungum's eyes, approached and whispered, Sasuk, think about it. The best way to raise Mount Hua's honor is to strengthen the Sahyungs and break apart those Jungnam Sect bastards, right? That... The elders will also appreciate and praise Sasuk's hard work. This sly bastard. Eungom wasn't oblivious. He could tell that Chung Myung was manipulating him. But such sweetly honeyed words were too enticing for Eungom to ignore. He wasn't interested in receiving praises for his efforts, but to beat down the Jungnam sect was. Do you think it's possible? Unknowingly, Eungom had asked for Chung Myung's opinion. Hearing that, Chung Myung smiled. I am Chung Myung. Eungom looked at Chung Myung and coughed. Looking back, it was none other than Chung Myung who had changed these children. Weren't these children training because of Chung Myung? Perhaps this process was more necessary than learning a new sword art. No matter how lucky he was, it was impossible to teach that new sword technique in a short period and overcome the Jungnam sect. Just once more. Eungom looked at everyone and opened his mouth to speak. Disciples, listen to me. Yes, Sasuk. The third-class disciples set their full attention on Eungom, desperately pleading with their tired eyes, their last hope. There's a limit to how proud I can be that you are showing such enthusiasm in your training. After all, it is my responsibility to be the one who guides you all. However, it wouldn't be right for me to disturb your ambitions when you're voluntarily training so vigorously. What is this? Oh, is that the sound of hope crashing into pieces? Until the conference, I will leave the training to you all. In the meantime, you don't have to come to the training hall and are free to train anywhere. However, you must be careful not to hurt yourselves. Master, this isn't right. Sasuk! You may all continue now. Eungom turned his body away. Some of the third-class disciples unwittingly stretched out their hands to grab hold of their fading hope. But upon seeing the look in Chung Myung's eyes, they quickly pulled back. Eventually, Eungom walked away and Chung Myung turned his body and twisted his head toward the abandoned disciples. So who was the one that told Sasuk that you were having a hard time? Say it quickly. The eyes of the third-class disciples were dyed with despair as they watched Chung Myung pull out the wooden sword on his waist. Chapter 72. This is too much work. Chung Myung climbed the mountain with an expression that clearly showed his annoyance. It's so slow. Chung Myung sighed. He had never raised a disciple in his previous life. Even his Sahyong, who always desperately searched for reasons to nag Chung Myung, never once dared to ask that he take in a disciple. His Sahyong held discussions with the other elders who were worried about whether Chung Myung's unparalleled swordsmanship would be passed on to future generations. What he told them was, I am worried about that as well. However, I am still a human. I feel sympathy and love just as anyone else does. I cannot ever request a disciple to be sent under him. Chung Myung is the sort of man that would beat a dog for not walking upright. Of what sin did the children partake to deserve such punishment? If we are Taoists who cultivate the Tao, we cannot commit such acts of cruelty. Since then, no one ever asked Chung Myung to accept disciples. Now that I think about it, it feels pretty bad. Those bastards just spoke about me however they wanted. What's so bad about his methods? They are growing up so well. Of course, it took a lot of work. Chung Myung raising the third-class disciples was no different from an adult teaching an infant to walk. If it was anyone else, they would coddle the child and hold them at every step. However, the toddler can only truly stand independently by being thrown off their feet and figuring it out for themselves. I really would rather die than to suffer like this. As a result, it took more time than expected, and as the training dragged on, there wasn't enough time left for Chung Myung's own practice. He was almost at the point where he was ready to sacrifice his sleep in order to train. Chung Myung took a deep breath and looked up at the sky. Sahyong, do I have to go this far? It's easier for me to just try and grow myself instead of waiting for them to catch up. Well, do that then. Eh?
Seriously?
Chung Myung sighed. He was well aware that it would be impossible to recover Mount Hua's former glory on his own. Sure, Chung Myung could make Mount Hua famous alone, but he couldn't live forever, right? Then, wouldn't Mount Hua disappear once he dies? What Chung Myung had to create was the spirit of Mount Hua, which would never disappear. A flower with beautiful petals is nice, but it fades and rots quickly. The spirit of Mount Hua must be like the roots of a giant tree. It may not be seen, but it keeps the being alive.
I know.
How can life be so easy? Chung Myung felt dizzy at the task ahead of him. He continued organizing his thoughts as he climbed the mountain. Upon arriving at his training ground, he quickly scanned the surroundings.
She won't come here again, right?
He was an hour early. It was time for everyone to be in bed. No matter how driven a disciple was, they wouldn't come to train at this hour. Of course, he would have to meet her later, but that would be when she officially comes back to Mount Hua.
Huh?
Chung Myung, who gazed around, raised the wooden sword wrapped around his waist. His eyes, which looked at the sword, were serious as he stood tall. The playful eyes he had when teaching the children faded away. Replacing them were the eyes of a swordsman who had been through countless battlefields with his sword.
Return to the old me?
No, that wouldn't be enough. Chung Myung broke his entire foundation. He denied the history he had built up in his previous life and started a new foundation to go further. But that alone won't be enough. Chung Myung changed the foundation of his strength, but he couldn't change his swordsmanship. If the sword wasn't changed, then he would have to make his sword stronger. A little bit stronger, faster. No, it wasn't enough.
Did I actually defeat the Heavenly Demon?
No. If the Heavenly Demon hadn't exhausted his energy after the joint efforts of those who climbed the mountain, Chung Myung would have never been able to take him down. Chung Myung had claimed that he was the greatest swordsman in the world, but he was just a sore loser that was unable to defeat the Heavenly Demon in frontal conflict.
What if I could have defeated the Heavenly Demon alone?
If that was the case, no one else would have died. Both the Sahyungs and Sajes would have returned to Mount Hua safely. They would have lived their lives peacefully, and his Sahyung would be back to nagging Chung Myung while he secretly drank alcohol. Then, Mount Hua wouldn't have collapsed, and no one would have died on that mountain with the Heavenly Demon. Regret? It's not exactly like that. Chung Myung wasn't the kind to hold on to the past and weep. The problem was what lies ahead.
Where is the guarantee that someone like the Heavenly Demon wouldn't appear again?
Perhaps a more frightening character than the Heavenly Demon might aim for them. To protect Mount Hua from all possible cries, he had to become strong. Greater than anyone in the world, more than Chung Myung of the past and the Heavenly Demon. To do that, Chung Myung's sword, which was nearly perfect in the past, couldn't hurt the Heavenly Demon.
Why?
Because he hadn't tried to sharpen the sword further. No
matter how sharp a tiger's claw is, it cannot catch a flying bird.
There is a limit that cannot be crossed. The Heavenly Demon's martial arts shattered everything Chung Myung believed was right, as if ridiculing Chung Myung, who thought that the end could be reached by following the path paved by the ancestors. Just like a person with his feet on the ground, looking at a bird flying freely in the sky, he had no choice but to stare at that unachievable dream. If Chung Myung wanted to reach the Heavenly Demon's level, then he would have to jump beyond his past self first. But how? Chung Myung's eyes narrowed.
I'll have to throw it away.
But to discard everything. Only when the vessel is empty can it be refilled with something new. However, Chung Myung already emptied everything when he was reborn anew. Now, he would have to refill it. So what should he refill it with? Would it be Mount Hua's teachings or Chung Myung's own path? If not,
it doesn't matter.
Chung Myung's sword begins to move slowly. Protect the techniques and teachings of Mount Hua. Abandon Mount Hua's guidance, or create a new path as Chung Myung. It is all an obsession.
You're right, Sahyung.
If filling it was natural, so was throwing things away. There was no need to decide right away what to fill and what to discard. Look, Isn't the sword still moving as it did in the past? Don't set limits. The moment you decide what to accept and what to abandon, the sword becomes bound by limits that have been created. Leave it alone. Let the sword travel as it pleases and as Chung Myung wills it. The sword of Chung Myung drew soft arcs cutting through the dark. At the same time, it seemed like plum blossoms began to bloom in the sky. Although it was the plum blossom of Mount Hua, it was different from what Chung Myung knew. It was a little more lively and a bit gentler. It stretched out and scattered and then descended, from east to west and back to east. The plum blossoms that began at the tip of Chung Myung's sword bloomed. Soon after, white flowers encroached upon the night sky, bringing in early spring to the mountain peak where he was training. Soft, fast, glamorous, and beautiful. However, plum blossoms are bound to wither. Atop the peak, the plum blossoms disappeared as if they had been a mere fantasy. Chung Myung stood alone amid the fading illusion, with his sword stretched out and closed his eyes.
I feel like I learned something.
He didn't completely understand, but it felt like he took a solid step forward. Although it was Mount Hua's sword, it was a sword technique to Chung Myung that surpassed any of Mount Hua's other techniques. A sword that can go beyond his limits and the limits of Mount Hua too.
Phew!
Chung Myung let out a low sigh.
It won't be easy.
It wasn't about inventing a new sword art. It was about opening a new frontier and creating new opportunities. Still, it was a long way off. Just as Chung Myung's history grows with him, this sword will grow too. Now it was just the bud of a plum blossom, but someday...
You!
Suddenly, a voice came from Chung Myung's side and he rushed away.
Wow! Fuck! What?
Before he could realize it, someone else had appeared. Chung Myung, frightened, repeatedly blinked as he scanned to see who it was.
Is she that girl from last time? You something. Ah, right. Yu Yisol, that was her name.
Yu Yisol was looking at Chung Myung with a blank gaze.
No, but how did she get so close to me? I didn't even sense her.
No matter how great her technique was, Chung Myung should be better than her. Even if he was deep in concentration, he could clearly feel the presence of those around him. Last time too, this woman had done the same thing and suddenly popped up out of nowhere. What was with her?
Has she mastered the art of assassination? How can she keep doing this?
Come to think of it, despite her being ahead of him right now, he could barely feel her presence. It was one thing when you relied entirely on your eyes and ears, but it was unthinkable for this to happen to a Taoist who has mastered all 5 senses and utilizes their ki to sense their surroundings. Seeing Yu Yisol staring at him, Chung Myung was deeply concerned.
How do I fix this? How much did she see?
For now, he needed to figure that out. Yu Yisol opened her mouth.
Plum blossoms.
Everything. She clearly saw everything. She tilted her head to the side as if she didn't understand what she saw.
Right, yes, do not understand it.
Chung Myung smiled brightly. If it was anyone else, they would have been dumbfounded in this situation. But just who was Chung Myung? The unprecedented accident of Mount Hua. His Sahyong made sure to point out every time that there were more accidents after Chung Myung joined Mount Hua than in the entire sect's history before his initiation. For such an experienced Chung Myung, this situation was nothing. First, he needed to act naturally. He bowed his head to Yu Yisol.
How have you been?
As Chung Myung took a step closer, Yu Yisol flinched. Why? Why flinch? Yu Yisol looked at Chung Myung with serious eyes.
Are you going to kill me to silence the witness? What? What the fuck? Are you crazy?
Ah, the words naturally escaped him. Chung Myung, who cursed without realizing, covered his mouth in shock. Another day wasted. Just why did this woman have to come and bother him so much? Now, there was only one way out. Chung Myung waved his hand and quickly fled the scene.
Well then, goodbye for now. Wait.
Yu Yisol tried to stop Chung Myung, but he ignored her pleas and left at full speed.
When you can't make any excuses, it's best to just avoid the problem altogether.
Yu Yisol stretched out her hand towards his back, but lowered it as if he was already gone.
Plum blossoms.
She looked at the running child's back with blank eyes and clenched fists.
I was caught!
This was obviously Chung Myung's mistake. Thinking about it though, it won't make a difference if only one person caught him. Even if she told everyone what happened, no one would believe it. But he had to be careful from now on. If there's just one witness, they'll be written off as crazy. But if 3 or more people saw it, then everyone would believe it.
When the Baek disciples return, I need to be careful with my training.
Not just the training, right? Chung Myung nodded with a determined face.
I have something I must do before the Baek disciples arrive.
He quickly began to descend towards the sect. Chapter 73.
Over here. Oh, young master, you're here again. Come this way. We'll guide you to a good seat. I'm not asking too much of you, right? Oh my, why would it be like that? Thanks to your frequent visits, business is going well, and life is worth living.
Chung Myung headed to a window seat at the guidance of the restaurant owner.
Here's a cold, wet towel. Wait here just a moment more, and I'll bring you alcohol that you always have. What would you like to eat for today? Just give me whatever you recommend. Yes, I will talk to the chef and ask for the best food to be prepared. I don't want the best, I want the most delicious, you bastard.
Who was he trying to fool? However, the man ran to the kitchen and brought 2 bottles of chilled alcohol.
Here you are. Thank you.
Chung Myung opened the lid without delay and poured it into his glass as soon as he received the bottles. From the sound of pouring alcohol to the act of drinking alcohol, everything was delightful.
People live for this taste.
No matter how much privilege Chung Myung had earned, and no matter how little he cared for the rules of Taoists, it was still unacceptable for a third-class disciple to drink alcohol in Mount Hua. Alcohol wasn't banned completely, but it was strictly prohibited within the sect grounds. But who was Chung Myung? He was the sort of man who must do exactly what he is told not to do. Especially tempting are the acts that are forbidden.
Oddly, if you tell me not to eat, I end up eating more.
The 2 bottles Chung Myung had stored in his cave were long gone, and now it had become a daily routine to change out of his uniform and stop by this place to have all that he wanted because of the permission the sect leader gave him. How often did he frequent this restaurant? Well, only the owner of the place would know that. Chung Myung gulped 1 glass down and looked at the other glass as if he had left the mortal plane and entered paradise.
Taoists are supposed to go with the flow in life, so why do they all have these silly restrictions?
Aren't Taoist rules stupid? What? Chung Myung is a Taoist too? No, he was a bit different. Chung Myung poured another glass and brought it to his lips. Without holding back, he looked at the glass and then softly gulped with a smile.
It isn't the same as it used to be, Sahyung. Alcohol tastes the best when hiding from the watchful eyes of that nagging Sahyung. I am still here like this.
There was no one there. Chung Myung looked at the glass and smiled. It felt strange. He never missed anyone in his whole life, but now he was feeling sentimental while drinking. But it wasn't like he was too deep in his thoughts. The past is the past. If the Sahyungs saw this side of him, they would laugh at him. In this world, whether they were called Taoists, saints, or deities, his Sahyung was innately just a playful old bastard. The same went for Chung Myung.
Now, here's the leopard fish skin, and here's the pig feet fry.
The leopard fish skin was made with oyster meat, pork, and jellyfish, and the other one was made with onion and pork feet. Both were Shangxi foods.
What about the pork belly? It's coming soon.
Chung Myung raised his chopsticks, smacking his lips. Weren't the things on his table the best delicacies? After drinking a glass of alcohol, having a delicious piece of meat feels no different from entering nirvana.
This is paradise. This is paradise.
Sahyung, sorry, but I plan to live, so I hope you live happily wherever you are. The door opened, and a group of men entered.
Welcome.
The owner ran and greeted them. All those who entered were young men and women.
Wait, maybe they're too old to be considered young men.
The men seemed tall, strong, and well-developed, but the women were certainly a bit younger than the men. In any case, Chung Myung observed them from the side. Those who came inside sat at the table next to Chung Myung. Chung Myung didn't pay any more attention to them and went back to eating.
We get to eat food after such a long time.
We don't have to eat those fasting pills anymore, Sahyung.
Isn't that why we're here? Our priority is to go up to the mountain as soon as possible and greet our elders, but I'm sure they will understand us stopping here first.
Sahyung?
Elders?
Chung Myung frowned and looked at the group seated next to him. All of them had black uniforms, and on the chest was a plum blossom pattern.
The Baek disciples.
They had an embroidered plum blossom, so they all had to be from Mount Hua. Since Chung Myung had never seen them before, and their ages seemed to fit, they had to be the Baek disciples. Chung Myung bowed his head. He hadn't committed any crimes, but he didn't want to see them here, nor did he want to get involved with them. Fortunately, he wasn't in uniform, so as long as he didn't get tangled up with them, there wouldn't be any problems.
I can't even eat properly. I need to quickly leave after gulping the food down.
Meeting these people here would be a pain in the ass right now. It was best to not get involved at all.
But where is Yusame?
I think she went up Mount Hua first.
Didn't we decide to meet in Hwaum?
When did Yusame ever listen to us?
Then the masters might already know that we're here.
It's fine. Everyone knows that Yusame is unique.
I guess we're lucky then.
The young man, sitting in the middle, finished placing a simple order as he requested food and alcohol for everyone at his table.
Well, look at that.
Chung Myung frowned.
These little second-class disciples are openly drinking in the middle of Hwaum. Even if the sect is falling, this is too much.
Children these days. Seriously. What? What about Chung Myung? Well, he is different. He's close to 100 years old, after all. Everyone worked hard and overcame the training really well.
Who among us could say they've suffered more than Sahyung? We just followed you.
Right.
Sahyung had the most difficult time.
The tall young man, sitting in the middle with a smile.
Well, isn't he handsome?
Chung Myung was quite good-looking himself, but the black robe on this man and the presence he evoked, how should he put it? Didn't he seem to appear like the legendary heroes in fairy tales? We've all trained hard together. I know just better than anyone just how hard everyone had worked. So, I will treat you all to this alcohol today. Don't feel burdened and drink as much as you want.
Thank you, Sahyung.
Just don't get too drunk. We need to climb up Mount Hua in the evening.
Yes.
Laughter filled the table. So they finished their training and settled on having a drink in Hwaum upon returning. Then the one being called Sahyung must be the great Sahyung of the Baek disciples, and the rest are the second-class Baek Sahyungs. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to enter this place without a second thought.
I can imagine how the sect will turn out.
Chung Myung snorted at the scene. When he was a second-class disciple, he wouldn't have dared to even think about drinking with others. If anyone had been caught drinking, they would have been placed in the repentance room for an entire week. That was why Chung Myung had to be stealthy when he drank. Yeah, he did drink. How could he not drink? But it was fundamentally different. He drank in secret, not openly like them. Unaware of Chung Myung's poisonous thoughts, the disciples clinked their glasses and began to drink. As soon as the snacks were served and the table was filled, the atmosphere heated up.
I should quickly eat and get out of here.
Chung Myung moved quickly in a hustle. Yet, the moment he poured himself another glass, he heard some words that he couldn't ignore.
Baekchung Sahyung.
What is it, Saje?
After all this hard work, we'll be able to get good results in the conference, right?
The one called Baekchun folded his arms and nodded.
Right, Sahyung?
Saje, to be honest, I don't know. But there is one thing I do know.
What is that?
Effort never betrays a man. Baekchun's eyes had a brilliant smile in them. We've done our best. We made it through that arduous training and constantly beat ourselves up. Even if we don't win, isn't it true that we've made commendable progress in this time? Yes, Sahyung. Don't get too hung up on winning or losing. We're in this for the long game. If we lose our eyes in the present, we'll never be able to see the future. Ah, I was short-sighted. However, I do want to win. Baekchun smiled softly. When a smile appeared on that handsome face, the surroundings seemed to brighten in response. The disciples there looked at him with absolute trust. But there was one person nearby who had a rotten mouth in response to his speech. Does he put oil on his lips? Chung Myung gulped down alcohol with a sour expression as he listened to those smoothly flowing, disgustingly sweet words. He wasn't the kind who would enjoy such cringe-inducing speeches. I think there's something hidden about this man. He was the same as the others, but something felt a bit off about him, although it didn't feel like he was a bad person. Then where do we stand? Can we fight against the Jungnam sect on equal footing now? Well, Baekchun opened his mouth with a sullen face. The Jungnam sect is strong. Isn't it one of the 10 great sects? Yeah. In the past, Mount Hua was also one of the 10 great sects. However, to be honest, the difference between us and the Jungnam sect has grown beyond comparison. Everyone's face darkened at those words. But that's just what others believe. Baekchun raised his voice as he spoke, refreshing the atmosphere. Skills aren't necessarily proportional to fame. We lost to them in the last conference, but the difference wasn't that large. During all this time, haven't we focused on our training while even reducing our sleep? We'll be able to contest against them well this time. With the Jungnam sect? Was Jungnam this great from its inception? Was Mount Hua always the Mount Hua that we know? Nothing is set in stone. If we work tirelessly, it's not impossible for us to one day look beyond our current position. He spoke with a voice full of determination that attracted the hearts of those who listened. As everyone gazed at Baekchun with admiration and respect, it happened. A low chuckle from beside. The heads of the 6 people sitting at the table turned in unison. Realizing that their gaze was on him, Chung Myung covered his mouth. Shit, I didn't mean to react. Hearing such absurd words, he ended up laughing, receiving everyone's attention. Chung Myung came up with a solution to the situation as usual. Just act natural. And he started to cough. Chung Myung frowned when he saw that the disciples didn't go back to talking with each other. Why aren't they deceived? My acting was perfect. I gotta cough more violently. Young man. What? Baekchun slowly rose from his seat and spoke to Chung Myung. Young man, who could you be? I don't believe I've ever seen your face in Hwalm before. If it isn't too rude, may I ask your name and what family you belong to? Why does it suddenly seem like Chung Myung was screwed, right? Chapter 74. Baekchun narrowed his eyes. Who is this guy? He was nothing short of absurd. From the moment they entered this place, he felt a sense of incongruity. Now that he looked closely, he understood why he felt that way. Why was there a child, who might have just turned 15 this year, ordering all this expensive food and alcohol? Of course, it wasn't impossible. The sons of high-ranking officials or the children of wealthy elites could do this. The children of the merchant families also enjoy such pleasures from a young age. The problem was that this was Hwalm. As far as Baekchun knew, there were no high-ranking officials, no descendants of wealthy families, or children of wealthy families here. Even if they were here, Chung Myung's age doesn't match up. So who was this child that was drinking alcohol alone in Hwalm? The child coughed and waved his hand. I'm just a passerby. Don't worry about me and continue with your meal. A passerby. Baekchun's eyes softened. Right, that was also possible. Alright then, since we ended up meeting here, why don't we introduce ourselves? I am Baekchun, second-class disciple of the great Mount Hua. Chung Myung grunted a little as he covered his face with his long sleeves.
This bastard, why is he so persistent?
He couldn't back out or beat him up now. If the fact that Chung Myung had beaten Baekchun so that he could run away spread around Mount Hua, then the sect leader would be enraged, and Eungum, who began to nag him a lot these days, might run wild and try to cut Chung Myung down. Then everything Chung Myung had built up would come crumbling down.
I can't let that happen.
He can't let himself get tangled up with this young man for no reason. Chung Myung coughed twice.
I really don't have a name worth offering.
Isn't it a bit ungentlemanly to cover your face while having a conversation?
Gentleman? Why gentleman? You should just leave me alone, you bastard.
Chung Myung's emotion were slowly overwhelming him. For now, the first thing he needed to do was avoid further interaction. Chung Myung quietly got up.
Well, I need to leave.
Hold on.
Let's have a talk the next time we meet.
Chung Myung, who was turning around, smiled as he grabbed the alcohol bottle on the table and bowed with his face half covered.
Goodbye.
Young man, I would like to speak with you a bit longer.
I'm sorry, I have no interest in playing with men. Farewell.
As Chung Myung rushed to the entrance, Baekchun's expression went stiff, and he quickly stretched out his hands. Where does he think he's going? The moment his hand went to grab the hem of Chung Myung's clothes, swish! Chung Myung smoothly sidestepped his grasp and avoided Baekchun's hand, which merely cut through the air. Huh?
Take care.
Chung Myung jumped out of the window next to the table and left. Baekchun looked at the place Chung Myung had left with blank eyes. He avoided it. He definitely used the grasping joint lock at the last moment. Even if it didn't reach the pinnacle, it was still enough to catch a child. But it was avoided.
Sahyung, why didn't you catch him?
What?
Didn't you let him go?
A look of embarrassment appeared on Baekchun's face. How should he answer this? Holding a young child against their will isn't something a Taoist should do.
As expected from Sahyung.
Baekchun put on an awkward smile. There must have been some mistake. He must have been tired from the long journey, or maybe he was too relieved by the fact that he came back to Mount Hua. There was no way he could have lost that child if he had seriously used the technique.
I thought there were more people in Hwaum, and now there are many faces I've never seen before.
Hwaum isn't a small place, so there's no way we can know everyone. If there is a chance, we might meet again.
Yes, Sahyung.
Baekchun smiled and went back to his seat, but his smile wasn't as bright as before.
Ugh, what rotten timing.
Chung Myung kicked the stone lying on the road.
Why did he have to come there and make a fuss? There were a lot of other people around. Anyway, have I run out of luck? Even the weakest bastards come to step on my toes.
How unfortunate. When he thought of the food he didn't get to finish eating, his stomach hurt. How much money did he waste?
Well, at least I saved the alcohol.
As he climbed up to Mount Hua, Chung Myung continued to drink from the bottle.
It lingers on the tongue. If only there were snacks to go along with this.
Chung Myung smacked his lips and threw away the empty bottle.
Climbing a mountain is so difficult.
No matter how many times he climbed the mountain, it seemed like he could never get used to it.
But that Baekchun kid.
Suddenly, a group of people outside of Chung Myung's plans appeared. Of course, their presence didn't bother him, but
it might get a little annoying.
Chung Myung's life has been so comfortable on Mount Hua because of the preferential treatment he got for his achievements. But that wasn't all. The biggest reason was the age difference between the elders and the third-class disciples. Compared to the elders, who were all over 50 years old, the third-class disciples were children below 20. This gave them a bit of a leeway to work and train. The scariest person for a soldier in the army isn't the general or the emperor. It is his immediate supervisor. Isn't it common sense that a corrupt boss with a short temper is more frightening than a distant mastermind? There wouldn't be anyone that would think otherwise.
Baek-chun, huh?
First of all, it seemed strange.
I shouldn't have laughed back there.
But he couldn't control it. The words he heard from Baek-chun were so absurd.
Overtake the Jungnam sect?
On what basis? Chung Myung clicked his tongue over and over. If only those idiots who ran their mouths could at least defeat the third-class disciples of the Jungnam sect.
Oh, my Sahyung. Just look at these fools that are considered disciples of Mount Hua in this era. Seriously, kids these days. Phew.
Chung Myung was more shocked than when he saw the state of the third-class disciples. How much martial arts could the third-class disciples even learn? They wouldn't have even gotten a clear taste of what martial arts is, so it wouldn't matter. But the second-class disciples are different. The third-class disciples are taught the foundation. Second-class disciples grow through training. First-class disciples reach the peak. And when they become an elder, it is natural for them to complete their own martial arts path. Right. That is the standard.
Oh my God.
Chung Myung took a deep breath. When he saw the second-class disciples, Chung Myung felt his stomach turning. However, they were also disciples of Mount Hua, so Chung Myung should embrace them.
I shouldn't be wasting my precious time like this.
Seeing the second-class disciples, an unknown sense of urgency grew in him.
How much longer will I have to wait for these disciples to grow into competent martial artists?
It was still a very, very long way off.
Joel Sahyung, all the third-class disciples have been asked to gather.
Why?
Our seniors are returning.
Well, okay. Did you tell Great Sahyung?
Yes, he said he'll be there soon.
Okay. Jogul took off his training clothes and changed into new ones. The sunset was approaching. Come to think of it, I wonder if he's back yet. Jogul opened the door, went out, and opened the door to Chung Myung's room. When he saw Chung Myung on the bed, Jogul was left speechless. He was lying down in a weird way and mumbling in his sleep. Did he seriously get drunk? Where was the smell of alcohol coming from? Flustered, Jogul ran to Chung Myung, grabbed him by the shoulders, and shook him. Chung Myung, Saje, Chung Myung, you crazy bastard, huh? Nothing. Forget that last one. He kept shaking him. Everyone was asked to gather. The Sasuks are back. You should quickly wash up. You look terrible right now. Chung Myung stretched himself out. I guess I dozed off for a bit when I took that break. That wasn't a break. Chung Myung, no creature in the world would sleep the way you did. Just say you got drunk and fell asleep. You wash up first. Chung Myung released the little key and quickly scattered the scent of alcohol. Jogul, with his eyes wide open, was about to say something. Huh? That overwhelming smell of alcohol disappeared in an instant. Jogul sniffed, just to be sure, but he couldn't smell anything. Huh? Why don't I smell the alcohol anymore? Alcohol? What is wrong with you? We walk the path of purity, Sahyung. Why would we have such things? We would get punished. No, I definitely. Let's go. We might be punished if we're late. Jogul felt that the situation was a bit unfair, but Chung Myung was right about being late for now, so he hurriedly followed after him. But why do we need to go greet the seniors just because they're returning? We need to at least welcome them back. They're returning from a long and arduous training session. Arduous. Do they think that staying in some closed space would promote growth? They probably just went and locked themselves in some building or cave with no light for 2 or 3 months, ate fasting pills, and swung their swords a few times. They probably thought to themselves, I got so much training done. How pointless. A bunch of young men and women isolated in pairs, wielding swords or whatever. Such cheeky training. Yet, they arrogantly ran their mouths about how difficult it was and how they can overtake Jeonnam with just that. It wasn't like that back in Chung Myung's day. It was inconceivable for such a thing to happen in Mount Hua 100 years ago. They said they would take down the Jungnam Sect bastards no matter what. This time, they really are coming back with great results. Even the sect leader wholeheartedly supported their training.
Is that so?
Yes. Baekchun Sasuk strongly requested it. Chung Myung snorted.
Sure.
You should also be careful of your attitude. Baekchun Sasuk is strict, so if you behave like you usually do, you'll get in trouble.
Sure.
I meant it.
Sure.
Leaving Jogul, who was nagging him, Chung Myung joined the third-class disciples. By the time Chung Myung arrived, quite a few people were already gathered. The sect leader, elders, and the Sasuks too. Everyone stood at the gate, waiting for the second-class disciples to return.
They're coming.
Open the gate. The newly built gate opened to the left and right. Soon, Mount Hua's second-class disciples entered the scene, draped in black robes.
Oh, look at the change in atmosphere. It's really amazing.
The Sasuks admired them and applauded. The elders also welcomed them with happy faces. There was only one person with a dull face.
When will this end?
Chung Myung wanted to go eat. Baekchun, who led the disciples, responded to everyone with a dazzling smile.
Wow, look at this.
Indeed, this disciple was unquestionably handsome. Of course, even Chung Myung had people who called him handsome in the past. When he got dressed up and went down to Hwalm, beautiful women would fall. Have some conscience.
Oh, come on, Sai-hyung.
Chung Myung shook his head and was just about to clap.
Huh?
Baekchun's eyes, which accepted the others' greetings, fell on Chung Myung. Baekchun, who paused for a moment, tilted his head. After watching Chung Myung for a long time, he arrived in front of Chung Myung and smiled with confused eyes. By any chance? Baekchun smiled and stared straight at Chung Myung as he spoke. Haven't we met before, young man? Was he going to get caught this time?
Do I really need to beat the hell out of this guy?
Chapter 75. Baekchun smiled brightly with that handsome face. It wasn't a perfectly handsome face, but it had a unique magnetism that attracted others to him.
What a familiar feeling. It reminds me a bit of the past.
Chung Myung experienced the same feeling from people of the Shaolin sect. Of course, this idiot couldn't be compared to them. But in Mount Hua, where there were many normal people, this feeling was weirdly out of place. It made him wonder why he was even here in the ruined Mount Hua. More problematic was that this man was trying to bite at Chung Myung's ankles and hang off them.
What are you talking about? For now, just act like you don't know.
You don't know?
I have no idea.
Ah, is that so? Baekchun tilted his head slightly. Rather than acting confused, he tried to act in a way that would provoke Chung Myung into admitting the truth. That's quite strange. I feel like I've seen your face before. When did you join us? The answer came from Yoonjung and not Chung Myung. Sasuk, this child entered while you were all away from Mount Hua, so you couldn't have met him. Is that so? I see. Baekchun smiled brightly. You seem like you are close to each other. As great Sa-hyung, it's good that you are taking care of the youngest. Don't you think so?
Yes, Sasuk.
Yoonjung answered with an awkward timbre. As if Baekchun discovered something from that answer, he nodded his head. It seems like this was a fateful meeting. It's only our first meeting, but you seem so familiar to me. I think we'll see each other in the future quite often. What is your name?
Chung Myung.
I am Baekchun. Be sure to remember my name. Then rang a firm voice. How can you leisurely have a chat over there when the sect leader is waiting for you? Ah, I'm sorry. I'm coming. Baekchun bowed towards Eungum. He then turned and joined his other mates as they advanced ahead. Jogul watched Chung Myung and whispered, "Have you met Baekchun Sasuk before?" "No?" "Even if he did, the answer is no. Be careful. Baekchun Sasuk is a second-class disciple. He's a great man." "Great?" "Yes," Yunjung added to Jogul's words. "He's known to be the savior of Mount Hua, a person said to have the potential to rebuild the crumbling Mount Hua." "Savior?" Didn't this phrase seem like something Chung Myung heard a lot in the past? When did he? Back when he first arrived on Mount Hua, people often used to say such things about him. Although Chung Myung quickly turned from the savior into the most mischievous gossip topic of Mount Hua. Wasn't Jogul the sect's best genius? "What are you saying? Someone might hear you." Jogul's face turned bright red at those words. "Baekchun Sasuk isn't someone I can compare to." Yes, a loser mentality is good. Having a sense of defeat makes people look humble too. "Huh?" "Nothing, Sahyung." Chung Myung looked at Baekchun, who was walking ahead. "Seems like a crane mixed in with a flock of hens." It sounds like a good thing, a very good thing. But in reality, it isn't a very nice thing to say. A crane is a crane. It doesn't make sense for a crane to be among the flock of hens. And in most cases, he has a flaw. When Chung Myung curiously looked at Baekchun, Yunjung continued to explain. "Actually, it's said that Baekchun Sasuk's sword techniques have reached the pinnacle. I heard that the elders have high expectations of him. Even though he's young, he is a genius." Perhaps among the second-class disciples of Mount Hua, Baekchun was the most important. "And that's very annoying." Chung Myung had also gone through this in the past. Why were there so many things to learn? The other disciples would train moderately and then go to bed, but the elders would always latch on to Chung Myung and brush him up on other techniques too. Even his Sahyung. No, there was nothing that his Sahyung didn't involve him in. But it was worth it. It's said the prestige of a sect is built over a long history, but the rise and fall of anything can often depend on a single person. Even if it's only a small or medium-sized sect, if they can produce a famous master, then people will flock to them in hopes of joining the same sect. On the other hand, no matter how long a sect has existed or how proud their history and traditions are, they are destined to stagnate and decline if they fail to produce any reputable masters. The only way for the dying Mount Hua to rise again is to produce a powerful genius. If just one mighty warrior exists within the sect, the entire situation can be reversed. Of course, that must have been the plan until I arrived. But what about now, though? There is a lot of money. Don't the Sasuks look strong? Tell me about it. I don't know if we can ever catch up to them. So cool and strong. Chung Myung looked at the two who were talking to each other with blank eyes. Are these idiots' eyes for decoration? Fine. Let's call them cool even without seeing anything. People's tastes are diverse, and Chung Myung was a good person who didn't impose his tastes on others. But looking strong and being strong were not the same. If these disciples are considered strong, then nobody would be considered weak. Looking at the Sasuk's level, Sahyungs would be able to win. At Chung Myung's words, Jogul dumbfoundedly smiled like it wasn't a funny joke. What nonsense. Right? Sahyung, my Sahyung. I have to live here listening to such words on a daily basis. If you have any conscience, come down and say something. Am I meant to live here unfairly like this? It was often said that people who ascended to the other world come to visit our world and give advice. Then Sahyung, who was known to be the icon of virtue, can come and advise something, right? Right? Can't you hear me? Come on! When Chung Myung was having a conversation with his Sahyung, the second-class disciples lined up. Huh? Just then, someone ran to join the lineup of second-class disciples from within the sect grounds. Chung Myung narrowed his eyes. Right, that one is also a Baek disciple. What was her name? Something. He was entangled in a strange relationship with her, so he ended up paying a little attention to her. Surely, she couldn't have told anyone about their meeting before, right? When Chung Myung frowned while looking at Yu Yi-sol, Jogul smiled insidiously. Come to think of it, this is your first time seeing Senior Yu. What? Right, Yu Yi-sol. Anyone who sees her for the first time can't take their eyes off her. That's how beautiful she is. Great Sahyung. Huh? Do you have any cinnamon powder with you? Why? I want to spray some on my ears. I feel like my ears are bleeding from listening to Jogul Sahyung. He couldn't help but feel like this. Yoonjung nodded his head. It's been a while since we both agreed on something. Well, I will give some to you later. Thank you. Jogul's expression grew distorted. Did I say something wrong? It's because there aren't many who know about Senior Yu. She's probably the most beautiful woman in Shaanxi. Listening to Jogul repeat himself like a parrot, Chung Myung took a deep breath. You are known to be the best in Mount Hua, and she is the most beautiful around. If someone who doesn't know our situation hears you, they'll think that you and her are up to no good. But that's the truth. Jogul pointed to Yu Yi-sol. Isn't she pretty? Before Chung Myung could answer, Jogul continued. But don't dream much. Senior Yu already has Baekchun in her heart. Sahyung. Yes? Chung Myung sighed deeply. Instead of wasting your time being interested in someone else's love life, wouldn't you have already made a name for yourself if you had just spent that time training? You aren't supposed to stab people with the truth like that. Just stop talking. Chung Myung looked at Jogul as if he was pathetic and turned away. Looking back, she did say that she was his senior. Apparently, that seemed to be correct. Chung Myung looked back at Yu Yi-sol. When all the Baek disciples lined up, the sect leader, who was watching them, smiled warmly. You've all worked hard. The training must have been excruciating, right? Baekchun began to answer on behalf of the others. Sect leader, it wasn't difficult at all. Our training was done with the support we got from the sect, so how can we call it difficult? And the results? Baekchun smiled. We managed to realize that the path of the sword is endless in life. However, we have returned with achievements great enough that we would laugh in the face of our former selves. That's good to hear. Hyunjung looked at Hyunyoung. Finance head. Yes, sect leader. Now that the children of Mount Hua have returned from their hard training, shouldn't we celebrate their return? What nonsense. No, it's nothing. Of course we should. Hyunjung stared at him with a subtle gaze. This man is becoming more strange by the day. To be precise, the frequency of saying strange things had increased dramatically since the Eunha Guild arrived. It was hard to tell for sure, but it felt like the tight reins around him had finally gone loose. Well, we have it prepared in the meal room. It should be enough for everyone. I see. Hyunjung looked at the second-class disciples. There are many things I want to say, but it wouldn't do to hold you back here after your long journey back. Since I don't want to keep you here, let's head inside. Sect leader, with all due respect, may I ask you one thing? Hyunjung wanted to clear this crowd quickly, but Baekchun didn't seem to notice. Feel free to ask. The scenery here seems to have changed a lot since the last time we were here. I was wondering what happened. Good things happened. Thanks to that, I was able to restore everything in the sect. It was a soft but firm answer. After hearing that, it was hard to ask what the good thing was. You might have a lot of questions, but we also have a lot of time ahead of us, so we can take this slowly. Yes, sect leader. Eunam. Yes. Eunam, who was on Hyunjung's side, came forward. Please look after these children who have suffered for so long. Yes, sect leader. Hyunjung nodded and turned his head. Chung Myung. Chung Myung's face contorted. No, really? Does that man really have to call me like this day after day? There shouldn't be any work today. Yes, sect leader. Chung Myung walked out. Come to my room for a while. I have something to discuss. Again? Baekchun, who was watching this unfold, was shocked. Again? He spoke like that to the sect leader. Baekchun doubted whether he had heard correctly or not, but it didn't seem like he was mistaking the words because all the second-class disciples had the same expression on their faces. However, he didn't understand why the third-class disciples didn't seem to discipline this child. It wouldn't be wrong even if this child was harshly hit for behaving like that to the sect leader. But even the sect leader was smiling despite those words. How about if I prepare some snacks? Okay, I get it. I'll come. Hyunjung led Chung Myung to his residence with a happy face. Baekchun, who silently observed the scene, looked incredulously at Eungum and asked, Sasuk, that child, just who is he? Well, Eungum smiled. I think it would be good for your mental health to not pay much attention to him. What? Especially if it's you. Eungum shrugged his shoulders and turned. Unpack your belongings and come to the meal room. Don't be late. Yes. Baekchun felt a strange feeling again. Only this time, the sense of incompatibility felt much greater. Perhaps this awkward feeling was simply because he had returned after being away for a while. But just one thing. Baekchun's eyes turned to follow Chung Myung, who was walking with the sect leader. He narrowed his eyes as he stared in disapproval at the one he didn't like. Chapter 76. Sa-young, what is all this? Despite all the hard work we did, no one is praising us. Baekchun couldn't find the words to respond despite someone talking to him. It was because he, too, was surprised. Unexpectedly, there was a huge feast in front of them. From the perspective of the secular world, it may be somewhat lacking to be called a feast. However, for Mount Hua, this seemed no different from what would be eaten by an emperor. What's more, there was that. Isn't that meat? Baekchun rubbed his eyes. In front of his eyes was certainly food that had been acquired by killing a living animal and carving its flesh. How could a pure sect commit such an act? Where did the money come from? I'd like to know the same. Just where did Mount Hua even get such money? Where did the meat come from? Wait, Sa-young. Come to think of it, the inside of this place has also changed. I thought it might just feel awkward because we've been gone for so long. But doesn't it look shiny and clean? Now that you mention it, yes. Baekchun looked around. The entire building might not be newly built, but it looked like it had been recently renovated. All the holes in the walls were covered, and the whole place seemed to be fixed cleanly. There are new-looking halls, and now this place. There's even meat on the table. I can't imagine what happened in Mount Hua while we were away, unless some god of wealth descended onto this place. Baekchun smiled. God of wealth. Mount Hua is a sect that the god of wealth had abandoned. If any sect could compete with the Beggars' Union, it would be Mount Hua. No, even they might be richer than Mount Hua. Just because the Beggars' Union was a group of beggars didn't mean that the sect itself was poor. But for Mount Hua to have such wealth, why did it seem so out of place? Baekchun lifted his head and slightly looked at Eungum. Sasuk, this food. This is food the finance head prepared to raise your spirits. Eat a lot. No, why is he speaking so casually about this? Sasuk used to say that he would survive solely on grass like a rabbit for the sake of Mount Hua. Where did that Sasuk go, and when did he switch sides like this? Even stranger was the reaction of the third-class disciples. The third-class disciples, who were there to congratulate the second-class disciples, didn't show any surprise at the quality of food placed in front of them. They just stared at the table sternly. Baekchun listened to their conversation from the side. I'm tired of meat. Isn't there anything different? Fish or something? Crazy bastard. Where will we find fish on the mountains? Do you need to be beaten with a fish to restore your senses? What the hell are those idiots talking about? What? They are tired of meat. Unable to understand the situation, Baekchun, who was frustrated, opened his mouth. No. He was about to open his mouth. Baek-chun turned his head to the side to shut the mouths of his mates. Let's just eat first. We have money, so we get to eat meat. I was sick of having those pills for the past year. Baek-chun, who felt suppressed by the laughs of others, opened his mouth. Is it alright to start eating? Even the elders and the sect leader haven't arrived yet. Huh? Ah, I didn't notice. Hold a moment. Yes, thank you. Eungom took his chopsticks and put a piece of meat in his mouth. That was the sign that the others could eat, and the Sahyungs frantically moved their chopsticks. Pop, 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 pop. Food bounced into the air, but there was nothing to worry about. The chopsticks caught everything in the air because it was precious meat that had to be treasured. Baek-chun closed his eyes upon seeing everyone's behavior. He felt that he was staring deeply into the abyss. It might look exaggerated to others, but this was a normal reaction. Mount Hua was the poorest sect in the world, and the disciples were the poorest people in the world. They had only eaten food made with grains and a few nuts in all their time here. To say it politely, they served healthy meals, but truthfully, it was the cheapest diet that could be afforded. Besides, thanks to their closed-door training, the second-class disciples only had fasting pills for the past year. Some, like Baek-chun, could purchase food with money when visiting family. However, most of the disciples hadn't so much as smelled the scent of meat for years already. Of course they were losing control of themselves. In the meantime, Baek-chun looked at the third-class disciples leisurely eating their food. Looking at their nonchalant attitude, he realized that this food was nothing special in the current Mount Hua. Sasuk, Eungom, who was eating and drinking, turned his head and looked at Baek-chun. What? Does the food suit your taste? It isn't like that. I just don't understand the situation. Just what happened to Mount Hua in the time we were all away. Right. I didn't think of this from your position. Eungom laughed. It's too long of a story to tell. You'll find out eventually. All you need to know is that a lucky star rolled into Mount Hua. Lucky star? It was then. Kwang! The door opened wide. The second-class disciples, who were gulping down meat, flinched and stopped at the sudden sound. If anyone could open the door so boldly, it had to be an elder. Huh? Are there any elders who are that young? As if. Surprisingly, the one who opened the door was Chung Myung. The child, who followed the sect leader earlier, entered in anger. There's a place to sit here. As Jogul slightly raised his hand, Chung Myung bowed to Eungom and then stomped over to the seat. Those nearby the seat moved away slightly so that he could sit comfortably. Baek-chun narrowed his eyes at that sight. They're taking care of that child. Of course, it could happen if they were polite and good kids. But the third-class disciples Baek-chun knew of were quick-witted and violent. The word good didn't fit well with them. There would be only one reason they would be acting like this. Has that child caught them all in the palm of his hands? It was unbelievable, but there was too much visible evidence to deny it. The fact that the seat was left for him, and the seat was in the center with Yoonjung and Jogul on either side. Yoonjung is the great Sahyung of the third-class disciples, and Jogul is the strongest of them all. So he took control of them both. But how could this child have turned them into his people? And why hasn't Eungom Sasuk said anything? It was quite rude to kick the door open. It would be troublesome, considering that there were second-class disciples and Eungom Sasuk inside. It would have been appropriate to apologize right away. Eungom Sasuk greatly values morals and manners, so he would definitely say something. Yet, he was casually eating like he didn't care. The more I think about it, the less I understand. Baek-chun shook his head. In his eyes, he looked at Chung Myung talking to the others. Why are you so angry again? He wants me to go to the Eunha Guild again. Again? Right? I'm not some messenger. Yoonjung grinned at Chung Myung's complaint. But you liked it at first. That was only the first 1 or 2 times. Ugh. Chung Myung scratched his head. Fortunately, I only need to visit the branch in Hwaum. If I had to go to Xi'an City, I would have fallen dead. Seeing Yunjong smile and comfort him, and Jogul chuckle at the side, Baekchun became convinced. He has all the third-class disciples in his grasp. He wasn't sure what method was used, but it was certain that Chung Myung had power over them. In many ways. Baekchun smiled. Yunjong, the great Sahyong of the third-class disciples, always treated the seniors with respect. Baekchun thought that Yunjong would have bowed to someone kind, but Chung Myung didn't seem to have a kind inclination no matter how Baekchun looked at him. I'll have to find some time to have a conversation with him. While Baekchun was curious about the third-class disciples, Great Sahyong, aren't you going to eat? Ah, I will. Baekchun picked up his chopsticks, but he looked around soon after picking them up. Where is Yusame? Well, she was here a while ago. The two disciples looked around. She was there until we came into the dining hall. It seems like she went off somewhere. Everyone answered indifferently, like this happened a lot, but Baekchun didn't like that response. Shouldn't we look for her? This banquet is for all of us who went training. We should wait until we're all together to have fun and celebrate. But there is no one who can find Yusame. If she doesn't want to be found, we can't find her. It'll be a waste of energy, Great Sahyong. Baekchun's forehead scrunched together. Those who saw it turned their heads away, feeling uncomfortable and sighing. Yu Yisol was a bizarre person. It wasn't easy to find her unless she wanted to show herself. But since Baekchun had this stiff expression, they had to at least pretend to search for her. Sahyong favors Yusame too much. He was normally a calm person that was fair to others, but he would always lose his composure over any issue involving Yu Yisol. Well, it wasn't like they couldn't understand, but it was annoying for them. At the moment, when one of them was about to get up, the shut door opened slowly. Everyone's eyes were upon the entrance. Through the sunlight pouring in through the open door, a woman walked in with small steps. Same, Baekchun called. Yu Yisol, who came inside, scanned the surroundings as if trying to find someone. Smiling, Baekchun raised his hand. Same, over here. Yu Yisol started to walk, but it was in a direction away from Baekchun. Step, step. Yu Yisol, who walked with a smooth gait, reached her destination and stared intently at the person sitting ahead of her. Baekchun's eyes twitched. Yu Yisol asked the man in front of her, Can I sit here? The second-class disciples, especially the men, were shocked enough for their eyes to pop out of their sockets. Did Yusame talk to a man? No. When was the last time we even heard her talk? But the shock wasn't over. The man she talked to was Chung Myung. He responded with annoyance written all over his face and waved his hand like shooing away a fly. No, you can't. Then let's talk for a moment. Chung Myung firmly answered, No, I don't want to talk to you. Go away. Is he crazy? The color drained from the faces of the second-class disciples as they reeled in shock. Chapter 77. What the hell is going on here? Jogul couldn't come to his senses. It was the first time Jogul saw her from such a close distance. He wondered if there could be any disciple in Mount Hua who didn't know of Yu Yisol. It wasn't because Jogul was a third-class disciple. He had never even heard of her having a friendly conversation with anyone. Despite being a disciple of Mount Hua, Yu Yisol was known to keep her distance from others. But now, she was talking to Chung Myung right in front of him. Soon, the piercing glares of the second-class disciples all stabbed into Chung Myung like razor-sharp daggers. Wow, those eyes could really kill people. Well, it was all aimed towards Chung Myung, who was sitting next to Jogul. But by sitting next to him, it felt inevitable that he would be dragged into the crossfire. Chung Myung, please, be respectful, you bastard. These are the second-class disciples. What is with that tone? Despite all that, Chung Myung remained calm. In an atmosphere that felt like something was about to happen, Yu Yisol whispered softly as if nothing was wrong. It'll only be a minute. I said I'm not interested, but it really will just take a moment. I said no.
Don't you get what I'm saying?
Watch the way you talk. Speak politely, you bastard. Jogul ended up pressing on Chung Myung's thighs without realizing it, causing Chung Myung to turn his head towards him.
What?
You shouldn't ask that. He shouldn't have asked that in front of his Sasuks. He should understand what was happening. Clicking his tongue, Chung Myung turned his head to Yu Yi-sol.
I have nothing to say or speak about with you, but I have something to tell you. I really don't want to hear it. It's fine. Just 1 minute. Let's go outside.
No need.
Can't you see I'm eating? Then I'll wait until you finish.
The second-class disciples were on the verge of going crazy. First, they had never seen Yu Yi-sol speak so much at once to a young disciple. No, to be precise, they didn't remember her ever talking so much with any of the second-class disciples either. But didn't it seem like Yu Yi-sol was clinging onto this man? Right. The second thing that made them agitated was the attitude of Chung Myung.
That crazy son of a bitch. Nothing is going to happen now, right? Doesn't that bastard have eyes?
He has to be a true Taoist. Burning anger and subtle respect were pouring onto Chung Myung. As a Taoist who cultivates and walks the path of Tao, the first thing one must do is stay away from worldly desires. However, Yu Yi-sol's existence was one that destroyed that dedication. No matter how well disciplined a person was, they had no choice but to listen and stray from their path if Yu Yi-sol made a request. Anyone would, seeing her beautiful face and expression. However, Chung Myung was openly complaining that Yu Yi-sol was annoying him. That was unimaginable for the second-class disciples.
I said no. I have a lot of work to do. Find someone else. I came here for you. No, why would...
It was then. It was low. Although it was low, it was a sound that spread widely after being imbued by ki. Everyone turned their heads to see Baekchun, who steadily got up from his seat and smiled at Chung Myung. Chung Myung, was it?
Yes.
A short answer. But Baekchun wasn't angry. In such a situation, showing anger meant that the opponent won. I understand that you're tired from visiting the sect leader and taking on various tasks. You're likely even doing work that I'm unaware of. However, since your senior is so kindly requesting your time, don't you think you should hear what she has to say, regardless of how tired you may be? Baekchun spoke softly to Chung Myung. He thought that it would work out.
Why?
Baekchun's hand trembled. Did he hear wrong? No. So why did he hear the word why? Shocked, Baekchun looked at Chung Myung's expression. Seeing that pouty expression, it didn't seem like he heard it wrong. Forcing the anger down to calm himself. Be calm. If he got angry at a third-class disciple, it would reflect negatively on his character. Did you say why?
Yes.
There are many reasons. First of all, a person should have manners. There is also a rule which says that you need to respect those above you.
Ah, manners.
As if he understood, Chung Myung nodded and looked at Yu Yi-sol.
Senior, yes. Apologize quickly. He's saying that you aren't behaving politely right now.
Yu Yi-sol raised a finger, pointing to herself.
Yes, apologize. Me? You don't seem to understand at all.
Chung Myung explained it.
This is a party to celebrate the return of the second-class disciples. It's rude to make use of this gathering to sort out your personal affairs and act individually.
Ah. As if that made sense, Yu Yi-sol nodded her head, stood from her seat, and bowed to Baekchun.
I apologize, Sa-hyung. I didn't think that far.
No, Same, that's not... Baekchun bit his lip. Just why did it turn out like this? And when he tried to open his mouth and manage the situation, Chung Myung spoke again.
Not to him. You should apologize to Sasuk, since you made a mistake around your senior.
You're right. Yu Yi-sol bowed her head again towards Eungum.
This disciple was short-sighted.
Eungum smiled. It is fine now that you understand, so sit down.
Yes, Sasuk.
It was Baekchun who ended up getting Yu Yi-sol into trouble. He couldn't figure out what to do. He was flustered, and it was embarrassing to back down without seeing it through to the end. Aren't the second and third class disciples looking at Baekchun in anticipation of what he would say. How could he sit back down when so many were watching him? It would turn him into a joke. He let out a low, empty cough a couple of times and looked at Chung Myung.
Oh no, I need to stop him.
Jogul and Yoonjung looked at each other. It was hard to beat Chung Myung with a sword, but it was even harder to beat him with words. This guy had no sense of logic. He would resort to all sorts of sophistry and illogical things if it meant winning. If the conversation continued, Baekchun might end up humiliated in front of them. So Chung Myung had to be stopped. Sasuk, congratulations on your return.
Isn't today really great? Since the Sasuks have returned from training, it looks like we won't have any problems in the future.
Jogul and Yoonjung desperately tried to switch the topic. They didn't mean to defend Chung Myung. It was simply because they didn't want to see Mount Hua turn into a mess with Baekchun and Chung Myung fighting on their first meeting. Baekchun glanced at the two of them. Reflected in their desperate gaze, Baekchun opened his mouth with narrowed eyes. Chung Myung, was it?
Ugh, what a persistent guy. I don't know anything, and I don't care.
Understanding that it was impossible to stop him, the two reached out and grabbed the hem of Chung Myung's robe. Please, just this once in your life, behave politely. Did he understand their earnestness? Chung Myung opened his mouth.
You must have had a tough time traveling all the way here.
Oh? Yoonjung and Jogul were shocked. How long had it been since such pleasantries came out of Chung Myung's mouth?
You keep asking the same thing over and over. Do you need to go rest?
As if his character could change overnight. Damn that consistent bastard. Baekchun's eyebrows twitched. I will ask once again. Are you certain that we haven't met before?
Nope, I've never seen you before.
It will be better if you answer honestly.
Hey, I already told you that we've never met. Do you think I would deceive you?
Looking at his glistening eyes, no one would think he was lying, except for the third-class disciples and Eungum. The second-class disciples might also doubt him. Really? I'll know if I ask. Baekchun turned towards Eungum. He didn't want to do this, but this was the only way he could regain the upper hand. Sasuk, I saw that child in the morning drinking alcohol in a restaurant in Hwaeum. Eungum's eyes twitched. Really? Yes. As far as I know, it is forbidden for the third-class disciples to leave Mount Hua. However, it is definitely unforgivable for them to leave behind their uniform and travel in plain apparel down to... It is fine. Yes, I saw... Huh? Baekchun, who bowed his head with clasped hands, lifted his head. Did he hear it wrong again? No. What was up with his ears? He keeps hearing the strangest answers. I said, it is fine. Baekchun looked at Eungum with a shocked face. Eungum was a man who valued manners and discipline above all else. He wasn't strict simply because he was the head of the White Plum Blossom boarding house. His strict personality, which was sensitive to the rules, made him the head of the dorms. And such a person said that it was fine for a third-class disciple to go down Mount Hua even if it was against the rules. Sasuk, that child is allowed to go down Mount Hua without asking for permission. Permission? Who would give a child such permission? The sect leader granted it to him. Have you got an issue with that? Sect leader? Really? He was so shocked that he had covered his mouth with both his hands. Hearing the tone of Sasuk's voice, he knew that asking again would be crossing the line. Somehow, Baekchun seemed to be getting off on the wrong foot with everyone today. Baekchun turned to Chung Myung with a shocked gaze. Chung Myung was quickly moving his chopsticks and inhaling food as if he had no interest in what was happening. Baekchun would have been less angry if the child at least looked at him with a sneer, but this indifference was infuriating. Baekchun bit his lip. I'll see this through to the end. He had no intention of backing down. Baekchun opened his mouth again, but then a man came in through the entrance. It was the finance head, Hyun-young, wearing his usual cold expression. He strode in and looked around. We greet the elder. We greet the elder. When everyone stood and greeted him, he just waved his hands as if it was annoying.
Right. Continue having a good time. I shouldn't have come. I am only here to check it out. Everyone, eat as much as you want and rest in peace. I am leaving. Eungum, be sure to keep an eye on them so they don't play too much.
Yes, Sasuk. Baekchun, who was still standing, spoke. I have something to say to the elder. Hyunyoung, who was about to walk out, turned and looked at him.
What is it?
I apologize, but I saw a third-class disciple drinking alcohol down at Hwaum today.
Alcohol?
Yes. Hyunyoung's face contorted.
A third-class disciple drinking? Are you sure you saw it with your own eyes?
Definitely. He denies that it was him, but I surely saw correctly. Baekchun slightly covered his face to hide the smile under his hands. It might seem impolite, but that child was the one who provoked him first, so he had to resort to something like this.
Who is this disciple you saw?
Baekchun turned to Chung Myung. He was pretending to be calm, but Baekchun was sure that Chung Myung was dying inside. Don't blame me for this. This is to set the rules straight in Mount Hua. The third-class disciple, Chung Myung.
Who?
Chung Myung, that one over there. When it comes to the elder, they couldn't know each of the third-class disciples by name, so Baekchun pointed to the child. Hyunyoung, who looked at Chung Myung, frowned, then opened his mouth in irritation with anger rising up.
What about it?
Yes, that Chung Myung drank.
Huh? What about it? What?
Chapter 78. Elder. Baekchun stared in stupefaction while Hyunyoung looked at him with dissatisfaction. Did I say something wrong? Baekchun rushed to clarify and repair the situation. It's wrong for a third-class disciple to go down to Hwaum village and drink alcohol. Although the child was given the authority by the sect leader to descend at will, was he given permission to drink alcohol too? I don't think he understands what he did. Hyunyoung's face twisted again. He seems to have understood it clearly this time. And immediately,
You're someone who doesn't understand words. What?
Hyunyoung spoke without even trying to hide his anger.
Did you set the rules for Mount Hua?
Huh, how could I?
Then was there any rule in Mount Hua that prohibits one from drinking when they're outside the sect?
Baekchun couldn't bring himself to answer that question. No, there was no such rule. After all, what kind of sect would create a rule that forbids drinking? But a Taoist should have a sense of propriety.
And
Hyunyoung looked at Baekchun.
What about it?
Elder.
What's wrong with having a couple of drinks?
Why did it seem like Hyunyoung's face kept growing redder and angrier? That wasn't all. Eventually, Hyunyoung's face turned beet red as he pointed at Baekchun.
There's so many bastards who can't even pay for what they eat here. But the guy who feeds you goes out and has some alcohol with his own money? Huh? What do you think you are? Do you think you can abuse your privilege as Sasuk to torment him?
What? Sasuk.
You're eating meat with the money he earned. Now he goes down and wants to have a drink with the money he saved up, but you can't stand it, so you come to me to snitch on him?
Baekchun floundered with a stiff face. It was difficult to understand. Why was Hyunyoung cursing at him? Was this really just for saying that he saw a third-class disciple drinking? Is this really Elder Hyunyoung? Supposedly, he was meant to join the North Sea Ice Palace, but ended up in Mount Hua, unable to fully demonstrate his skills. However, he was always known to be calm and cold. Is this really the same man? Seeing Hyunyoung wide-eyed and yelling, it was hard to tell if this was a dream or not.
If you're really so bothered by it, go down to Hwaum and make some money. But no, you sit around gaining a reputation for just being a disciple and use your privilege as Sasuk to bully him. Swinging swords and meditating all day isn't going to bring any money or food to the table. Your mind. Use your mind and do something worthwhile. Should I open that head of yours and make something useful out of you? What did you people even do to earn the meat on the table? Bang!
At that moment, someone violently slammed the door and entered. Here you are. A very strange smiling face appeared as Hyun-sang covered the mouth of Hyun-young from behind.
Let go of...
Let's go outside for a while, to a place away from the kids. Stay still. The sound of the door closing left the dining hall with a strange silence. No one could open their mouths. In that awkward silence, there was only one sound they could hear, the sound of something being eaten. What? Baekchun mumbled. Just what happened here? It was a statement that represented feelings of all the second-class disciples. Isn't it too strange, Sahyung? Despite the question being directed at him, Baekchun just silently set down the teacup in his hand. It was an old teacup that he had been using for a long time. Before he went into closed-door training, he thought that this cup had its own charm, but looking at it now, it seemed more pathetic than elegant. After all, this was the true state of Mount Hua. Old furniture, old buildings, and old people. The only hope of the worn-out sect were the disciples, and among them, their greatest hope was Baekchun. However, Baekchun returned after a year away, and now his hope seemed irrelevant to them. It's strange that new buildings were suddenly built, and it's strange that areas of the sect which were neglected for over a decade are repaired. No, I mean, that's a good thing. We couldn't do any of it before because the sect didn't have the funds, but... Baek-sang spoke in a strong tone, unable to hold back his anger. Isn't the behavior of the elders too strange? We came back from such a long and arduous training, but the sect leader didn't say much. Didn't the sect leader praise you enough for your effort? Still, it's been a year since we've been away. He is a man who is eager for change. Baek-sang bowed his head slightly. Thinking about it, the sect leader really didn't say much, but it didn't make sense to call him out like that. Sect leader could be fine, but wasn't Elder Hyun-young or even Eungum Sa-suk acting the same? Baekchun didn't respond. No matter what anyone said, it was truly bizarre. It wasn't like they were dissatisfied with their elders, but their treatment was strange. Didn't you feel it? The elders were all taking that child's side. Baek-sang. Yes, Sahyung. I am not that ignorant. How could he not understand when he was cursed and yelled at right to his face? Sahyung, that kid, he is quite cocky, isn't he? Even if the elders take his side, shouldn't he at least bow his head when we, his direct seniors, come back? But that one... Baek-sang went silent after that. If only that child had sneered or laughed at them, they could have called him out properly, but they couldn't do anything about his indifference. Baekchun narrowed his eyes. And I don't understand why Yu-same is so interested in him. Why? Just why? A small ripple occurred in Baekchun's teacup as his hand lightly trembled. It could be that Yu-same had some reason. But she barely speaks with us. I've never seen her talk so actively with anyone until now. And it isn't like we've only spent 1 or 2 days with her, right? Leaving us aside, at least Sahyung... Baek-sang. Yes, Sahyung. Don't get too angry. Baek-sang bowed his head and glanced at Baekchun's eyes. Baekchun tried to manage his expression, but it was inevitable that he would show a bit of how uncomfortable he felt. His eyes kept twitching, and he struggled to hold back a frown. I lost to that young boy. Not even a full saint or an elder. The difference of level between disciples within sects like Mount Hua is akin to heaven and earth. Just like how the Baek disciples couldn't speak against the Un disciples, Chung Myung also shouldn't be able to speak against them. Cheeky bastard. Baekchun bit his lip. At that moment, Baek-sang, who bowed, continued. I apologize. It's just unfair. We returned after such difficult training, but the elder didn't recognize our efforts. And that snake-like bastard who appeared out of nowhere is taking over the sect by playing cute with the elders, right? The time where we could play cute with the elders has already passed. You know that's not what I meant. He knew. He knew it all too well. Baekchun let out a low sigh. It's a feeling of subtly being taken over. Were they away for too long? In the past, as soon as they returned, the adults would have greeted them warmly and then come to visit Baekchun later. Now, they barely showed interest in him. Instead, they were all looking for Chung Myung. Baekchun was unhappy over the sudden change in status. He didn't know what Chung Myung did to have such great expectations from the elders and receive their protection, but Mount Hua was his sect. Baekchun was the only one who received the expectations of Mount Hua's elders, and he had to be the guiding light that would return the sect to brilliance.
Are you going to leave him like this?
What more can we do?
Shouldn't we at least beat it into him or discipline him? If we leave it as it is, Mount Hua will be a mess. Sa-hyung should establish order and set him right.
Baekchun smiled bitterly. He didn't like when his juniors talked back to him, but he wasn't the kind to beat sense into others. Calm down for now.
Sa-hyung!
Baeksang raised his voice, which made Baekchun frown. Seeing that, Baeksang sighed and lowered his eyes. Seeing that reaction, Baekchun nodded with a satisfied face. It's not that I don't want to.
Then why?
There are things we need to know first.
Huh?
Baekchun shook his head and set the teacup down. There is a proper order we must follow. Don't you think it's necessary to know why the elders are all fawning over that child?
Ah, right. We should do that.
He's coming.
Who?
As soon as Baekchun finished, someone knocked on the door. Come in.
Yeek.
With the sound of the door opening, the person who entered bowed.
Disciple Yunjong is here.
Welcome. Baekchun pointed ahead of him. Sit down.
Yes, Sasuk.
Yunjong cautiously sat down. He couldn't be sure if he should sit or not, despite the offer. Baekchun liked Yunjong's attitude. This is how things should be. Not behaving like that other bastard. Baekchun, who was relaxed, spoke in a soft voice. Yunjong.
Yes, Sasuk.
While I was away, you must have had a hard time trying to serve the elders and handle the disciples.
I just did what I was supposed to do as a disciple of Mount Hua.
Yes, you're right. That is a natural action. But... Baekchun paused for a moment, which made Yunjong lift his head to examine his expression, and then the expected words followed. It seems like strange things are happening in Mount Hua right now.
Are you talking about Chung Myung?
Baekchun didn't respond, but Yunjong knew what he aimed for. It is my fault for not leading the Saje properly. If you are angry, please punish me, Sasuk. No, it's not something you could handle. What I am saying is... Baekchun smiled. Tell me all of what happened while I was away. I'll listen to your story and decide what to do next. Yunjong sighed deeply.
It's natural for me to explain this to Sasuk, but it feels like I'm betraying Chung Myung.
Before coming here, Yunjong had already told Chung Myung. He asked if he could tell everything to the Sasuk who called him, and Chung Myung's answer was simple.
Go.
It would have been nice if he had given some instructions. Yunjong glanced at Baekchun for a moment and then spoke. First, I think I should begin from the time Chung Myung entered Mount Hua. As soon as Yunjong began to slowly unravel his story, the disciples listened to him with bated breath. And as the story continued, Baekchun's face gradually distorted more and more. Chapter 79. Once the story was complete, no one spoke. Everyone looked at Yunjong's face with a serious expression, like they had fallen into trouble. It was Baekchun that broke the long silence. So that child, yes, Sasuk, discovered the treasure and lost martial arts books of the sect, yes, and found a ledger which brought to light the affair of the businesses under Mount Hua and helped confiscate back the businesses. Right. In addition, he even cured the illness of the Eunha Merchant Guild's elder Huang. Yes. In return, Eunha offered to take care of Mount Hua's finances, and Hwalm. Yunjong nodded without saying a word. Thinking back, it was strange. Hwalm had a life that didn't exist when they first left for their training. Since they were away from Mount Hua for so long, he just assumed that Hua had improved greatly during their time away, but that wasn't it. Right. Baekchun opened his mouth, but closed it again. I get it. Yes, Sasuk. Then I'll take my leave. All right. As Yoonjong left the room, Baekchun had a serious look on his face, and the others in the room also had sullen expressions. No, just what? Baeksang opened his mouth, feeling frustrated and despondent. Then, doesn't this mean that one child solved all of Mount Hua's problems by himself? Shock and consternation could be heard in this disciple's voice. Baekchun couldn't even respond. The biggest problem with Mount Hua was neither their martial arts nor the small number of disciples. Mount Hua collapsed so quickly because they lacked the money to support themselves. It wasn't just that they didn't have money. There was an enormous debt. When he left for training, Baekchun's greatest worry was returning after a year only to find the sect abandoned and destroyed. But Chung Myung solved this issue. It's understandable why the elders like him. Baeksang laughed in self-derision at Baekchun's words. Hearing Elder Hyunyong yell at everyone about eating meat from that child's money, I thought he was the child of a great merchant and he was giving Mount Hua a lot of money. But this... He was literally feeding Mount Hua. Baekchun shook his head. There's no answer to solve this problem. If Baekchun was in Hyunyong's position, he would have defended Chung Myung himself. That was how significant Chung Myung's contribution was. He was a child that raised money like a god of fortune and solved all of Mount Hua's financial woes, even the problems which persisted for decades with no resolution in sight. It's a good thing Hyunyong didn't have children. If his child got into an argument with Chung Myung, his house would be a mess if he kept taking Chung Myung's side. He could always have another kid, but where in this world would he find another person like Chung Myung? Sayoung, this... Baekchun racked his mind, thinking heavily. If he had only solved one of the sect's problems, it would have ended with he made a contribution. But that child is intertwined with the Eunha Guild. As long as he has connections with Eunha, which manages Mount Hua's finances, and Mount Hua makes money from that relationship, Chung Myung's position will continue to rise. At least for the foreseeable future. But at some point, wouldn't his importance settle as the sect grows? Right, but will that moment come soon? As you know, this is all gold falling into a beggar's lap. It was good to see and good to touch. Even if it wasn't used right away, wouldn't you be happy just to possess it? Chung Myung was the one who gave gold to the beggar known as Mount Hua. No matter how hard Baekchun tried, he couldn't achieve anything like this. I can see why the sect leader would meet with that child alone. Baekchun bit his lip. When he returned from training, he thought that he would receive looks of adoration and approval from all the elders. But a guy who popped out of nowhere stole away the spotlight and received all of the elders' expectations that should have belonged to Baekchun. It was an issue that couldn't be ignored. Is it really such a big deal? Baekmoon, who only listened to the conversation till then, spoke. The discovery of Mount Hua's treasure was just a coincidence, and wasn't it pure luck that he treated Elder Huang? Saje, Sahyung, Mount Hua is a martial arts sect. It is unacceptable that the sect is giving preference to a child simply because he brought money into the sect. How can the others all encourage it and forget the values of Mount Hua? Baekchun slammed the table and spoke. Saje, you should choose your words very carefully. What you said is an insult to the elders and Sasuks. That wasn't my intention. But you aren't necessarily wrong. Yes? Baekchun calmly nodded his head. You are right. Mount Hua does seem unfamiliar now. No matter how much money is made, we must focus on our martial arts in order to truly restore the sect. You're right. That's true. Baekchun nodded at their responses. In the end, we have no choice but to get back to the basics. While now, the elders might be interested in him because of his contributions, but once they realize that the conference is approaching, there is no way that they'll be able to pay attention to the third-class disciples. Yes, Sahyung, you're right. So for now, let's focus on ourselves. We can fix that child's attitude afterwards. Baeksang glanced at Baekchun. But Sahyung, what? We aren't going to be the only ones to participate in the conference. The third-class disciples will also be included in it. Is there anyone here who doesn't know that? We can't be the only ones working hard. Shouldn't we also help prevent the third-class disciples from being humiliated? At that point, Baekchun looked with interest at Baeksang. What are you thinking, Saje? If we're only thinking about ourselves, then it would be fine for us to focus on our own training. However, as seniors to the third-class disciples, how can we forget to assist them? Even if it's a bit troublesome, we should take care of our juniors. It might even help us out in the conference as well. Baekchun grinned. As expected, Saje cares about everyone in Mount Hua more than anyone else. You're embarrassing me, Sahyung. We must have gotten alienated from them since we were away for a year, so it wouldn't be a bad idea to sweat together for a while. Yes, Sahyung, that sounds like a good plan. Baekchun and Baeksang smiled at each other. In the end, dignity comes from strength. A gentle person is respected, but respect only goes so far. Even in the family, authority is necessary. If left as it is, a day will come when the third-class disciples run amok without regard for their seniors. Before that, they had to be put in place. Teach them why the Sasuks were adults and why the third-class disciples must bow their heads. I hope that child Chung Myung has a talent for martial arts. Then, wouldn't Mount Hua have one more capable person to lead the future generation? The person who will lead the future generation is you, Sahyung. I cannot lead forever. It would be for the best if there was a smart child who followed my commands. Baekchun smiled. It looks like he couldn't even walk properly. Is there any hope for that child to have talent in martial arts? Baekmun said while shrugging his shoulders. Shouldn't that be why we teach and lead the juniors? Though it might be a little daunting for Chung Myung. I understand. The three of them smiled happily at one another. I need to teach you to properly appreciate the dignity of your superiors. Baekchun's cold eyes smirked as well. Are you sleeping? I was dragged to Sasuk's room because of you, and you're lying down so comfortably. Yunjong's face tensed up. I shouldn't even bother. He had no intention of asking Chung Myung to be polite to him. He threw away such notions on the evening that Chung Myung joined the sect. Nevertheless, he felt emotional after seeing the Baek disciples treat Baekchun with such respect. That's how sects are supposed to be. Seeing how Baekchun was revered, Yunjong felt like crying. There was a time when I was treated like that. After a certain person arrived, everything changed. Bad habits are easy to learn, but hard to correct. What are you thinking about, Sahyung? Nothing. This one is the problem. This guy. There was some respect shown for Yunjong in the past, but now Jogul treats him like some neighborhood brother. Yunjong took a deep breath and looked at Jogul. Gul, yes? Is it really a good thing that Chung Myung came to Mount Hua? Don't talk about strange things. Did something happen? Is that any way for a junior to speak to their senior? In the end, Yunjong decided to let go of everything and glanced at Chung Myung, who was lying on the bed before opening his mouth. The seniors asked me to tell him what he has been up to so far. And so? Did you decide to snitch? What's the point of hiding it? That's true. They were going to find out eventually anyway. And the reaction? Are you asking because you really don't know? I guess it's obvious. Yunjong and Jogul sighed. Seeing Chung Myung still lying on the bed, tapping his stomach, they couldn't help it. Crazy bastard. Good-for-nothing bastard. Anyway, Baekchun wasn't their Sahyung. He was their Sasuk. How could Chung Myung even think about provoking someone so senior to them on their first meeting? Baekchun wasn't strict with the third-class disciples. However, if the relationship goes sour, there is no way to know what the future will hold. Well, it won't be good. No one in the world can crush Chung Myung, didn't Yoonjung and Jogul also get defeated by him? Fortunately, they were able to make the most of their situation. However, if Baekchun tries his luck and decides to trample on Chung Myung, then the situation can erupt into an even bigger mess. Well, arrows are going to fall on us. I know. Once again, Yoonjung sighed and looked at Jogul. We should have assumed this would happen when we learned that the Sasuks were returning. Right. Call the others and tell them to be careful of their behaviors from tomorrow on. Even if it's nothing special, if they find something to nitpick, I'm sure they won't let us off easily. Yes, I get it. Jogul readied himself to leave with that response. But then he stopped and glanced at Yoonjung. Basahyung, yes? I am curious about something. About what? If Baekchun Sasuk and Chung Myung fought, who would win? Don't think about such ridiculous things and do what you are told. Jogul clicked his tongue and went out. Left in Chung Myung's room, Yoonjung glanced at the owner of the room, who was still dreaming soundly. Who would win? Was he asking because he really didn't know? Sleep well, troublemaker. Now, the peace in Mount Hua was finally shattered. In the future, there will be a lot of commotion. Chung Myung continued to sleep peacefully. His face seemed absent of any care or concerns in the world. Looking down at him, Yoonjung sighed before walking out of the room with a subtle smile. Chapter 80. Take one. Yes, sect leader. Eungum reached out and took a teacup. Plum tea, made by drying plum petals, is one of the things that Hyunjung is most proud of. Bringing that tea out meant there was quite a lot to talk about today. How is it? Before Eungum answered, he glanced at Eunam. He was checking whether it was fine to speak in the presence of others. Hyunjung, who took the tea, recognized this and said, It is fine. Yes then. Eungum opened his mouth. As the sect leader said, I didn't intervene, and there seems to be a bit of a problem. Hyunjung nodded at it. The atmosphere would have turned sour if Hyunjung Sasuk hadn't arrived when he did. As the sect leader said, there are subtle sparks flowing between the second and third class disciples. I see. Hyunjung sighed. This happened because of their decision. I was in a hurry. The difference between the Un disciples and the Baek disciples was too great, and the difference between the Baek and the Chung disciples was too close. As a result, the youngest of the Baek disciples, Yu Yisol, was almost the same age as Yoonjung, the oldest of the Chung disciples. Given that it was customary to have a few years difference between any group of disciples, it was apparent that this problem would explode at some point. It was inevitable. When they received the third-class disciples, Mount Hua couldn't actually afford to accept any new disciples. At that time, the sect's finances were dwindling to a dangerous low. It had grown so severe that new students were barred from joining. Then, someone suggested the idea of getting support from the disciples' families in return for allowing their children to join the sect. That was the beginning of the problem. With Mount Hua desperately struggling to hold together their crumbling foundations, it was necessary to gather funds by any means available to them. However, even if they had fallen from grace, Mount Hua was still a prestigious sect. They tried to be selective of who they accepted, but for the sake of the disciples who would grow up within the sect, they took the disciples of families who offered support without question. As a result, the Chung disciples are somewhat lacking in martial arts talent. In the past, the Chung disciples wouldn't have dared to act against the Baek disciples. But aren't the Chung disciples now different from what they were? Yes. Did they have a central figure? Didn't that figure change? A seemingly meaningless change began to ripple out and influence much more than expected. A single individual's existence was affecting not only their group, but also the relations between other groups. With Yunjong and Jogul as the center of the Chung disciples, they barely passed as third-class disciples of Mount Hua. However, now, the third-class disciples were gathered around Chung Myung, who isn't satisfied with merely passing but wants excellent results. People who are 20 years apart don't see each other as competition, but those who are 10 years apart, or even less, have no choice but to be conscious of each other. It's my fault. As Eungum bowed his head, Hyunjung firmly shook his head.
It isn't your fault.
Sect leader,
I was the one who insisted that you be the head of the White Plum Blossom boarding hall. Didn't everyone agree at that time? In the first place, this is something we all predicted when we started receiving the third-class disciples ahead of schedule.
These words weren't just meant to comfort Eungum. Mount Hua benefited a lot after creating the White Plum Blossom dorms. But where there is something to gain, there is something to lose. In the past, no junior would dare to skip the formalities with their seniors, regardless of the age difference. However, the third-class disciples never received anything from the second-class disciples. They were taught by Eungum and trained together with their comrades. Naturally, the distance between the two groups was bound to widen. That was the biggest weakness of the White Plum Blossom boarding hall. Eungum glanced at Hyunjung and asked, Sect leader, what do you believe we should do? Hyunjung savored the plum tea without saying a word. It felt calming to him, smelling the subtle scent wafting through the air.
What can we do?
Believing it like this.
People are always like that. Would their hearts be satisfied if we intervene and forcefully lead the situation? Sometimes, it isn't wrong to let the disciples clash with each other and learn from the disagreements.
Sect leader, this is about our disciples.
If you put your mind to it, you could even change the direction of a river. But if you force the stream to turn, even if it seems plausible at first, there will be problems that arise farther down the flow.
Hyunjung said with a smile.
Eungum.
Yes, sect leader.
Let's trust our children.
Eungum looked at Hyunjung with a complicated expression. The expression said he had doubts about this. At that time, Hyunjung spoke about a different topic than Eungum expected.
Baekchun isn't that kind of problem child.
Huh?
Don't you think so too?
Eungum's face went stiff.
No, it isn't him, sect leader. Baekchun isn't the problem, sect leader. The problem is Chung Myung.
Only then did Eungum realize that there was a huge gap in the way that the other elders saw Chung Myung compared to him. The head of the White Plum Blossom dorms, Eungum, saw Chung Myung up close as he controlled the third-class disciples. However, Hyunjung and the other elders only saw him as an adorable little puppy that brought blessings to Mount Hua.
Isn't Baekchun a careful and upright child? Even if his pride gets damaged and he loses himself to a moment of anger, he isn't the sort of person to harm a child because of it.
Pardon? Who will hurt whom? Baekchun will hurt Chung Myung? That's crazy. Somehow, the sect leader was too naive. However, explaining it seemed impossible. No, even if he could explain it, the sect leader wouldn't believe it. In fact, Eungum doesn't fully understand Chung Myung himself. The way that the sect leader saw Chung Myung was miles apart from how Eungum viewed him. How could he possibly convince Hyunjung? Yes, I understand, sect leader. In the end, Eungum had no choice but to silently leave.
Eungum.
Yes, sect leader.
There isn't much time left before the conference.
As soon as the word conference came out, Eungum's face darkened. To be honest, the disciples of Mount Hua didn't have any negative feelings toward the Jungnam sect in the past. In the first place, Mount Hua's feelings for the Jungnam sect had stemmed from a competitive spirit. But isn't competition inherently between people who are similar and not too different? The gap between Mount Hua and the Jungnam sect was like heaven and earth. No one had the burning spirit necessary to take down the Jungnam sect. But even if there was no motivation in this competition, who would want to see their disciples get beat up by the other side? For the youngest children, the difference between them isn't too great, and the loss is not too humiliating. However, The difference more than doubles when the older disciples take center stage, and it only grows farther when those who train directly under an elder appear.
We've solved many problems, but the most important problem hasn't been solved yet. We are only at the beginning, and we need to recreate the splendid glory of Mount Hua.
I'll keep that in mind, sect leader.
Right. Both of you can leave.
Yes. As Eungeum and Eunam left, Hyunjung got up from his seat and opened the window at the back of his room so he could see the peaks with melted snow. There were small flower buds on the plum tree that had grown fast. By the time the conference begins, spring plum blossoms will likely bloom all over the mountain.
Plum blossoms. Plum blossoms.
The seven sages' sword is back. However, Hyunjung was keenly aware of the fact that it was impossible to reproduce their past glory with just one sword art.
Perhaps if we still had the plum blossom sword technique.
Hyunjung tightly shut his eyes. He knew that dwelling on what was lost in the past wouldn't bring about a change. This wasn't the time to search for what they lacked. It was time to reinforce what they had. Even so, regret lingered in the corner of his heart.
Oh, ancestors, look down on Mount Hua.
Hyunjung was still unaware that an ancestor had already descended on Mount Hua. Unfortunately, Hyunjung made two mistakes. One was that he thought Chung Myung was a good child. But from Mount Hua's point of view, it wasn't a large issue. Chung Myung's ultimate goal was to help Mount Hua. The more Hyunjung favored Chung Myung, the wider his activities could be. It wasn't intentional, but thanks to Hyunjung giving preferential treatment to Chung Myung, Mount Hua was developing faster. But the other mistake was more fatal. Baekchun was not as mild-mannered or gentle as Hyunjung thought.
Anything. Need food.
The third-class disciples, huddled together in their boarding hall, had shocking faces. Chung Myung's practice left the disciples completely drained. He could somehow gauge the strength remaining in each and every disciple and would cruelly use that information to push them to their absolute limits, squeezing out every last drop of sweat from their bodies. Therefore, after everyone was done training, they would come back with stiff faces and sunken cheeks. Surprisingly, however, no third-class disciples expressed dissatisfaction from the harsh training. Of course, they felt like they would die each time they practiced under him, but weren't humans known to be adaptable. After this terrible training was repeated for over a week, it somehow became more bearable. They've developed so much that even when they stumbled into the underworld and locked eyes with the villainous death, they turn their backs on the Grim Reaper and return on their own. The more that iron is beaten, the stronger it becomes. And the more a man gets beaten, the stronger he returns. Moss doesn't gather on a man that's been beaten.
Moss doesn't normally grow on people anyway, you madman.
Even worse was that the third-class disciples could see that Chung Myung was right. They could feel their bodies changing day by day. Now they understood what it meant to have a fit body. But the problem was that a new calamity struck the third-class disciples who believed they could overcome anything if they just followed Chung Myung's training routine.
I think I'm going to die. The Sasuks are seriously. Isn't it getting worse each time?
The Baek disciples were tormenting them. That day, after Chung Myung and Baekchun confronted each other, they began skillfully bullying the third-class disciples. It was clear that they were deliberately harassing them on each occasion.
Why are they doing that? Do you even need to ask?
All eyes turned to the same location, and the one at the end of the gaze was, "Huh?" Chung Myung, who received their gazes, just tilted his head. "Why are you looking at me?" This bastard was definitely born without a conscience.